German architect. The reason why I was asked to do so is that I've known Thomas for almost 50 years. We met each other skiing. We were both very, very unsuccessful at the attempt. We were 8 years, and Thomas gave up skiing and began to build igloos out of snow. And that was a sign of a vocation to become an architect. And we became close friends. And when he was a teenager, I could only marvel at all the great buildings of the past that he was modeling. The Dresdner Zwinger, for example, with painstaking work, he was rebuilding at the age of 13, 14 classical buildings, and it was clear from the beginning he would become an architect. He comes from a relatively distinguished architecture family. His great-grandfather was Adolf von Hildebrand, one of the most important sculptors of Germany around 1900. His great-grandfather was Carlo Sattler, who is well known as an architect, particularly in southern Germany. Also many tombs are connected with him. His grandfather was Dieter Sattler, who was also a well-known architect, and at the end was ambassador of Germany at the Holy See. In fact, he comes from a distinguished Catholic family, and even if Thomas is for the first time in his life here in South Bend and at Notre Dame, his mother studied in the 1950s for a year at St. Mary's College, because Catholic families knew about St. Mary's College and liked to send their daughters to the American experience. This is a short background about the personality of Thomas. I myself owe to him very, very many things, but also the first introduction into American architecture, because when I came for the first time to the United States in 1986, I visited my friend Mark Roche in, at that time, Columbus, Ohio. That was the first place I saw in America, and then I took Greyhound to travel to Chicago, because Thomas was getting his master at the Illinois Institute of Technology, the IIT in architecture, and he introduced me to the grandeur of Chicago's architecture. And I'm very, very glad that he finally can come to Notre Dame, having lived for several years in Chicago and being a great knower of America. Thomas is well known in Germany as one of our best architects. I have a book written about the architectural office in which he has worked, Hilmer and Sattler and Albrecht, Architecture Urbanistic and Urban Planning, 2004 to 2010, which came out a few years ago, where you have a very good overview over all the things that the office in Munich and from the 80s also in Berlin has done in the last decades. I only mention some few things. Here in this office have built 13 museums, many, many hotels, private houses, but the most ambitious projects about which we speak today came, of course, with the German unification and the restructuring of Berlin. And I want to mention his three perhaps most ambitious projects, besides, of course, the rebuilding of the Schloss, to which this lecture today is dedicated. The first was the Gemäldegallery, which is one of the most beautiful museums in the New Berlin. If you ever go to Berlin, don't miss visiting it. I remember how impressed I was when Thomas guided me through this work, and the main gallery is close to the Potsdamer Platz. Potsdamer Platz was fundamentally shaped as a new center of Berlin after the unification, and it is a very, very important part in the new conception of Berlin as a unitary city. As you know, the city had been cut in two, quite exactly in the middle, so it didn't have neither East Berlin nor West Berlin did have a center, and it was the important task after the unification to build an urban center for Berlin. And the Potsdamer Platz has become it, and Thomas has built an enormous amount of buildings there over more than 20 years. And now Thomas is working at his first church project, at a rebuilding of a Garrison church, the Garnisonskirche in Potsdam, a church of great importance in German cultural history. Bach met Friedrich the Great in the Garnisonskirche. A lot of Prussian kings were buried there, and as you probably know, it was destroyed under the German Democratic Republic, and there is now the task to rebuild this important church, which I think is from 1735. And the Schloss in Berlin, about which Thomas will speak, is his most ambitious project up to date. The Schloss, as you probably know, is one of the most important was one of the most important buildings in Berlin. It's an 18th century building, and even if in the Second World War it was not really very seriously damaged, it was partly damaged, but not dramatically, the German Democratic Republic in the 1950s decided to destroy it. It was an act of vandalism. Thomas was just telling me, contrast it with the Russians, who appropriated the Kremlin, the Hermitage, for purposes of Soviet cultural propaganda, but the level of cultural barbarism that the GDR communists said went far, far beyond what we knew from Soviet history. And in the 1990s, the idea developed to rebuild the castle. Which form exactly? That is what Thomas will tell us about. The project to build the castle was won by one Italian, by very famous Italian architect, Franco Stella. I had the honor to dine with him in April at Thomas' house. And Franco Stella is also an excellent historian of architecture. You need a sense for Baroque architecture in order to engage in such a project, but combines knowledge of the tradition with the demands of urban planning for a modern city. And since he himself has no office, Thomas and his office have become the partners of Franco Stella, and they dedicate most of their time now in finishing this project, which in 2019 will house some of the most important museums of Germany. So it will become, in many aspects, a cultural center of Germany. And I'm very grateful to the School of Architecture when I suggested to Michael Bukulis, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, that we should invite Thomas. He was immediately enthusiastic, and he said this would be a great talk for both faculty and students to have a person who is really connected with the face that Berlin has gained over the last 20 years, as very few other people. We are very, very honored, Thomas, to have you here. Thank you for having crossed the Atlantic extra for this talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonio. Thank you for being here. It's a great honor for me to give a lecture in this wonderful campus, in this wonderful architectural and urban situation. Before I talk about the Schloss, I will show a few pictures giving the impression what our architectural ideas, Hilmar Sattler, Albrecht, is, because the Schloss, as we told you, is a collaboration between Franco Stella, who won the competition in 2008, and our office. One of our biggest projects which we did is the Gemäldegalerie, the German Louvre, the German collection of classical paintings, which has a huge hall in the middle. It's right in the middle of Berlin. The competition was done before the fall of the wall, and it was finished in 1998. And from this photo, you see our approach to architecture. It's very much quiet. It has a relation to the Mesica and Cordoba. It shows the topic, this middle room, which has 1,600 square meters, 16,000 square feet. This is a museum of top line. You know, the classical paintings, Caravaggio, El Greco, and so on, are top line. This is the master plan of Potsdamer Platz international competition in 1991, 25 years ago. There was a big enthusiasm about Berlin. A few months before, Berlin was declared to be the new capital of Germany. And the middle of Berlin, this is the Brandenburg gate here. This is the empty space between west and east, had to be filled with a master plan. And For this competition, 16 offices were invited, but only offices of combined architects and urban planners. It was not a competition only for urban planners. And we were happy enough to win the competition, which we never would have thought. You see it a little bit from the model. This part, this eastern, this view is looking north. This eastern part is a grid system of the early Berlin before the 19th century. Here's the big Tiergarten, and here starts the so-called New West, which is also a grid system. And we made a combination of these two grid systems. This is our plan, 1991. You see, we say the octagonal Leipziger Platz should be rebuilt. You know, this octagonal place exists also in Paris. And these are these different sites for the different investors. We say the block of 50 by 50 meters should be the main element. And we say we want only a few high rises here in the middle. By the way, we also say there must be a church in the new part of the city. This is why we say here at this very important place should be a church. This church was not built, but as my partners and I are very Catholic, so there is a certain need for this element. And this is how Berlin looks now. So the middle was really done after our plans, which we never would have thought. We believe very much in the conventional system of road, of car, and not of pedestrian malls. And in the low-rise city, Berlin is very low-rise. It's only 22 to 30 meters. And this was our idea, which was executed. And you must. So this was East Berlin. This is West Berlin. Here's our Gemälde gallery. The last project is the Ritz-Carlton high-rise on Potsdamer Platz, one of the last buildings which was built there. And our relation to architecture is that we always say what building was done similar. And in this case, we took Elias Sarin's competition, Chicago Tribune 1920, which is a very vertical building. And we put this vertical element with Chicago windows in this hotel project, which we executed on Potsdamer Platz. The train station is also done, but it's a very museum scheme, you know, a Nationalgalerie. Berlin, center of Berlin. The center of Berlin has a terrible history. It is a most terrible history, which I have to introduce. And the reason why the Schloss is rebuilt as a national project, like a Grand Projet d'État in France, is that this build shows Berlin before any bomb has fallen in 1940. Berlin became to existence because this is the island in the Spree. There is a road going west-east crossing at the island, like Paris, and at this crossing, the king puts his castle, you know, conciergerie. So this was the old castle, the Renaissance part, the Baroque part of Schlüter, Altes Museum by Schinkel, Church, Zeughaus also by Schlüter, Pergamon Museum. And this is a new Friedrichstadt, which was done in the early 18th century, a grid system, you probably know, with Brandenburger Tor. Leipziger Platz, octagonal place. So this is how Berlin looked, a very condensed city, historically grown with freestanding elements like the opera here, the Humboldt University, unter den Linden, the road facing the facade, we will see it later. The Gendarmenmarkt with a theater in the middle, and two churches, which is a very kind of ironic expression. In the 18th century, you have not one church in the middle. You are liberal. You tolerate other religions. So Frederick the Great said, "Let's make two churches. One is a French Catholic, and the other this is a French Catholic. It is a Protestant church." Berlin was destroyed heavily. All what is blue disappeared by the Second World War. So when you compare it to the cities like Hiroshima or Nagasaki, you have similar effects. It's not only the bombings, also there was fighting in the streets. Hundreds, thousands died there. And the result was that in this time, 53 to 89, only the black buildings were the ones who survived the war. The red ones are the new build. So Berlin, the middle of Berlin, is a new city. It's a new city. You must know that Berlin has an area of about 50 by 50 square kilometers. It has nearly the size of Los Angeles, 2,500 square kilometers. It's a huge city, and the center was mostly belonging to the east. Here are the lines of the wall. You must know there were not only one wall, there were two walls. One was shown only to the guys living inside, and then there was field in between. So if someone was happy to cross the first wall, he would be shot between the wall. Terrible story. Terrible story. Here the Schloss existed, and now there is the Palast der Republik, as it was mentioned before. And when you see this photo, you see that there was a need of getting back to the images, to the urban spaces which defined Berlin before 1940. This is a nice drawing of my partner, Christoph Sattler, which shows the center which we will occupy now in this lecture. Here's the Schloss with the cupola, which was done in the 19th century, opposite the Altes Museum by Karl Friedrich von Schinkel, the church, the Zeughaus, the building where the arms are collected by the same architect of the Schloss, Andreas Schlüter, and you have here Unter den Linden, the big street running to Brandenburger Tor, and here Humboldt University, you know, the two Humboldt brothers, very important figures beginning 19th century, both were educated under the influence of Goethe. The one, Alexander, traveled around the world, explored South America, Russia, did wonderful collections. The other, Wilhelm, founded this university. And here the so-called Museum Island is kind of the German Louvre. This is a wonderful painting, 19th century, by Friedrich Gärtner, who shows Unter den Linden, classicistic building, the monument for Frederick the Great by Rauch, and this street runs to the facade of the Schloss with the cupola, which gave kind of a very Baroque view. This is, you all know it, I saw it already in the office, Altes Museum by Karl Friedrich Schinkel, facing the other side of the Schloss. You know, these museums were all founded in the beginning of the 19th century when the German kings went to Paris two times, 1814 and 1815, after the siege of Napoleon, and they saw that Napoleon had turned the Louvre into a museum by Denon, the great collector. So people should occupy themselves with art instead of demanding for democratic solutions. So King Friedrich Wilhelm III said, okay, let's build a museum. It keeps away the people from taking over my reign. This is a photo showing the Schloss from the era of 1920. It's interesting, you see the Renaissance part over here, and then the two courts and the cupola, which were done by Andreas Schlüter, who was a very prominent Baroque architect. He also lived in St. Petersburg, and he was not only architect, he was also sculpture, you know, like the great Italian masters, Michelangelo, who did all two disciplines, sculpturing and architecture. This is a view over the Spree, the Portal number 3, where you see a high degree not only of sculptures but also of reliefs, which are the integral part of the facade. This is the south facade, a picture about 1910, and you must know the Schloss existed between 1715 and it was demolished in 1950, so over 240 years. And in these 240 years, the Schloss had several stages. For example, the windows were done in different ways. When in the beginning of the 18th century, you could only produce glass plates in a size of about 1 feet by 1 feet. So the division of the windows was much smaller. At the end of the 19th century, the windows were changed after 180 years, so they got another state. So one of the very rigid laws about reconstruction is you can only reconstruct a building when you know exactly how it looks. You must know it exactly. We have 8,000 photos of the Schloss, 8,000. We have a few spolies, that means old parts. And before we started to work, another architect for 10 years took these photos and made an exact plan of how it looked. And you know, a Schloss is not only a Baroque building, it's not only a Baroque building when it looks like. A Baroque building has not always the same distance between the windows. It's different. You don't see it, but then it makes the beauty. You know, the same principle of the well-tempered piano. The well-tempered piano sounds nice because I don't know the expression in English. The black, the fizz is also the gas. You know, it's an unclarity, and this unclarity was exactly measured by these 8,000 photos. So we have a plan how to really build it. This was the courtyard, the very famous Schlüter courtyard, which was one of the famous points to be visited before the destruction in Berlin, where there was this massive staircase, Baroque staircase, and it was very open. You know, the Schloss was like the Louvre, or like the Hofburg in Wien, or like the Residenz in Munich, always a public building. You could walk through. The monarchs did not have, they were not anxious of murder or something like that. So what you see here is also a painting by Gärtner. The people went through, it was a kind of a public space. Yeah. This is how the Schloss looked after the Second World War. There were fires, there was bombing. But even in August 1945, the Russian governor of Berlin started a first exhibition here in parts of the Schloss which were not so destroyed with classical painting. They showed Impressionist painting in August 1945 to show it's going on, you know, after this catastrophe. But then in 1950 it was blown up. Why was it blown up? The communists in East Berlin wanted to be more communist than the guys in Moscow who lived in the Kremlin, or in Warsaw. The Schloss was destroyed by the Germans and it was rebuilt in Poland as a symbol of Polish nationalism, and so their behavior was different. And here, unfortunately, was blown up. The East German established and to show its power, like the Western system, which was incredibly successful. So they built the so-called Stalinallee from the 1950s, leading to Moscow in this neoclassicistic style. And you have here this youth organization, which shamingly assembles to Hitler Youth. This is what East Germany built. You know, this is an aerial view. Here we have the Lustgarten. Here should be the Altes Museum. Here is the cathedral. The Renaissance part of the Schloss was here, and the Schloss was stretching till here. You still see here some things. And this was the Palast der Republik, which should be a symbol of modern socialism. And in reality, it was a kind of a copy of Moscow. That 1st of May, they had the parade. Here was the nomenclatura standing, you know, on the generals and the military passing by. And this is how the Linden looked. You remember the photo, the painting of Gärtner. That this wonderful street with here the Zeughaus, Andreas Schlüter, and here the Kommandantenhaus, and the bridge by Schinkel, where you have these wonderful sculptures by Carl Friedrich Schinkel, ends in this terrible building. I always say, if the communists would have engaged a great architect, Philip Johnson, or Mies van der Rohe, who would have built them a great building, this wouldn't have been demolished. Wouldn't have done it. But it's politically easy to demolish such a thing, which is not really it is not loved. You know, I think a building can only survive in the long term if it's used, and it must be loved by people. They must have a sympathy for it. It was finished in '68, and yeah, in the whole idea of rebuilding the Berlin Schloss is an idea of a single person, Wilhelm von Bodin. He's a nobleman from Hamburg, and he's selling machinery for agriculture. Very nice guy. And he came to Berlin in 1990. He said, we have to rebuild the thing. So it was not an idea of a politician or of an architect or of an art historian. It was the idea of a normal man. And he said the most important thing of such a project in a democracy like West Germany or like Germany, old Germany, 1990 after unification, is to set it on a wide basis. This is why he founded a society, a kind of a pressure group in which all kinds of people are engaged. Simple guys, bus drivers, craftsmen, but also Henry Kissinger is the most prominent member. And he raised money and he built a full-size model of this facade unter dem Linden, what you have seen. This is 35 meters high, this is 150 meters, and he got this scaffold. It's a big scaffolding. It was with a printed plastic thing which he bought in France, because France, in Paris, the Madeleine had been refurbished and they did a scaffolding with it. It costed several million, and by that people in Berlin got an idea of what the Schloss was, how big it was, how was the relation between Schloss, Altes Museum, Zeughaus, and so on. And he said, we must get the Schloss. That was his idea. And everyone, who's Wilhelm von Bodin? Well, and he convinced art historians, and they wrote, and in the very end, we had 3 decisions by the German Bundestag, by the German parliament, to get the money, because it could not be a project of Berlin alone. It is a grand projet d'etat, which costs €500 million, so 500 million only for the building. The facade itself, you will see later, costs 125 million euro per square meter, 8,000 euro. This is 40 times the sum you invest in a normal facade. So this was, and this was then the idea when we built the Schloss as it was. You know, that was the task in the competition. So it was only what will be inside. The outside would be very clear. And so these perspectives were done, and it's a clear thing. Do you want to have this or that? And in the very end, from all political parties, there was this will to do it in that way. Reconstruction. What is reconstruction? Reconstruction is a very sensitive topic in Germany, as in the end of the 19th century, there were a lot of reconstructions which were not real reconstruction. It was like fantasy. Let's build a train station in the Romanesque style. So there was, in Germany, is a very big problem to get this to do a reconstruction in such a scale. So you have, in the one hand, the abstract reconstruction. You probably know this wonderful work of Venturi Rauch in Philadelphia. It's, I think, the home of Benjamin Franklin, where just the outside, the outlines of these buildings are shown. Also the relations to the urban scale. But there's not only the abstract reconstruction, there's also the realistic reconstruction, for example, of the Barcelona pavilion, which was done to the 100th anniversary of Mies van der Rohe, 1986 in Barcelona. And they had very fine plans, they had very fine photos, so they could do it right to the millimeter. Another example, Monte Cassino. It's the first cloister, the first Christian cloister in Europe from the starting of the 6th century in Italy, which was completely destroyed in the Second World War, which was completely redone after 1950. So there is reconstruction is a building process which has taken part from 300 before Christ till today in every society, in every part of the world, when a precious building got lost. Another reconstruction part which we just finished 2 weeks ago is this Palazzo Barberini in Potsdam. This is the majory in Potsdam. These columns are of a church by Karl Friedrich von Schinkel. This obelisk is also from that time. This is the new parliament of Brandenburg, Potsdam, which was refurbished 5 years ago, and this is a museum for a German, for Hasso Plattner, the owner of SAP. And by this exact reconstruction, we had photos, we had drawings. We are within this. We have the ability of recreate these spaces again. Well, this is the team now. This is Franco Stella, the guy who won the competition in 2008. This is my partner Christoph Sattler, who studied at IIT also with me. This is Herman Dukenbar, our project leader. He's from the Netherlands, and that's me. And this is the project now. Now I tell you how we do it. These are the elevations, as I told you, which were given as exact facts to be filled with. And it's a huge thing. It's 210 meters in the length and 110 in the other direction. So it's more than 3 hectares. It has about 400 of these windows. And this is the Renaissance part of the Schloss is not to be reconstructed. Instead of that, we have here this modern facade of Franco Stella, which is facing the east, the east facade. And this facade created the most trouble. Franco Stella is a so-called rationalismo, you know, the Italian way, Kunstrichtung, what I say, the Italian style, which was created after 1920, which got influences from the Bauhaus, from the modern building, but also referring very much to the classic architecture. This painting of De Chirico is well known, and it shows this style of thinking with this rectangular or very geometric architectural elements. So this facade, that's a photo I took a week ago, is now finished. It's a huge facade. It is 110 by 35 meters. It has a strong relation to the Altes Museum, which is over here by Karl Friedrich von Schinkel. The thing with this modern language, you know, the problem, or the task, the wonderful task of rebuilding this Schloss is that you have these given facades of the outside, which are defined to the millimeter, and that you have to invent a new language of all the modern facades which are also there. So we have this long facade which relates to the millimeter, to the height of the floor in this building, and which had in the beginning an internal staircase like the Altes Museum, which was later fallen, which was later executed. It is a concrete construction. It is concrete, but the quality of the concrete, of prefab concrete, is very, very similar to the limestone which is used in the rest of the building. And this is a conventional technique which was applied by I.M. Pye in the rebuilding of the Louvre. I'm sure you have ever been there. Whole Paris and the Louvre are built in this French stone magnidoire, which is very bright, which has a quality that looks like the human skin. And our idea was with Franco to create a concrete which, similar like I.M. Pye, fits to the stone. And when you are in the Pye building, you see even in underground walking ways, we have these huge walls with magnidoire stone, and then there are parts in concrete, and you don't even see the difference. And by that, the old and the new times are glued together. This is the floor plan of the Schloss. You see, this was the Renaissance part. this is a huge staircase, which is a very, very important part of the Baroque attitude or habit, what took place, the ceremony in the Schloss. So the king who was friend of the Prussian king came in here with his car, carriage, and got out here. He always had to get out on the right side, and the carriage was leaving here, and then he was going up the stair. This is a ceremony which you can find in every Baroque cast. I mean, the whole Baroque thing, as you know, is very much related on Louis XIV's Versailles. And yeah, this is now the two plans put together. The red is the new Schloss. No, sorry. The black is the new Schloss, and the red is the old Schloss. So the Renaissance part is not redone. What is redone is the facade here, the north facade, the facade facing to the west, facade facing to the south, the courtyard, the Schlüter courtyard. And what Franco invented is that he said, I put this building in, so I have a nice corridor leading from portal number 2 to portal number 4. So this is a very much Baroque enfilade, and it resembles very strong to the Uffizi's in Florence. Another thing which I will tell you later is that it is possible to integrate altogether 42 rooms which can be integrated later in the building in the next 50 years. It's a grand projet d'etat. That means you can, for example, take this room and put it in later, which has been done in the Eremitage in Petersburg, which has done in Traskovye near Petersburg, which has been done in the residence in Munich or in Wien or in Würzburg, which is a kind of a convention. This is always important when you do such a project that you say it has been done before life. So we don't have to prove that we can do it. We must say, let's drive to this place and see how it is done, then it works. When you have a photo and you have 2 pieces of furniture, you can redo the room. Yeah, and this is what Franco changed as the most important thing, and this is why he won the competition. He said, okay, I rebuilt the outer facade of the Schloss, but I also make the inner facade. So the inner part of portal number 4, the inner part of portal number 2, and portal number 3 is a thing which I will reconstruct. So the new part of the museum of the Schloss are only the internal parts, but the internal public spaces are half historic and half modern. You will see that in perspective. It's an idea when you see it now, when I explain it to you now, every one of you will say, I would have had the same idea. But this is the complicated thing in architecture, that the real great thing are so difficult, like the tonnet chair. Yeah? The tonnet chair is one of the best inventions, and it seems that every one of us could invent it between lunch and dinner, but it is not possible. So yeah, this is now the ground floor, and the ground floor exists as in former times. You can walk through the Schlüterhof, you can walk through the Schlossforum. This is the entrance hall, and here are the parts for public events. So the next G8 summit will probably take here. It will not take in Schloss Elbau. It will take place here. Here are huge collections and what is necessary for a museum today: restaurants, cafes, bookshops, and I will show you later. This is the reference Franco took for this north-south corridor, the Uffizi's in Florence, and this is now the project of this so-called Schlossforum. That means this is the space between these new wings, which have these modern facades, which are done in concrete, with 8-meter high columns, which are only 30 centimeters thick. And this is the inner part of the portal number 4. When we don't have the money, it's a plain plaster facade. If we have gained more money, we do what the Baroque kings did. You paint it. And paint costs nothing, or almost nothing. And if we have gained more money, you do it in real stone. Fortunately, we are in this condition already, so all these sculptures are now in production, whereas these facades are finished already. What you also see here, and this is the wonderful thing about why you reconstruct historic buildings, the Altes Museum was exactly put in the axis between portal number 2 and portal number 4. That when you walk through, you walk on the axis of this wonderful building by Karl Friedrich von Schinkel. And as this Schloss is built exactly on the place where the old was, this effect comes up again. This is now the Schloss Forum, how it looked last week. We are very proud on this very modern and very strong facade, which will then be glued together with this old facade, which is in production right now. This is a few months ago, there was a public party, an open construction site, we call it, so people can go through and have a look what is going on. This is the Agora. Here on the left side, you see the floor plan, which is looking to portal number 3. The inside of portal number 3 was a kind of a Constantine arch, which is in Rome. You know, the Baroque architecture takes parts like Lego and puts it in. I need a nice portal. I take it from, I put it on the copy machine, I Xerox it and put it in. And this is what they did. And this is a kind of a huge public room, the entrance room, where you have these floors which are open to it. You can have ceremonies there. It's a public space of very high optical and political meaning. The first grade, when we don't have the money, we paint the facade here, and then we build it. And this is under construction right now, but you can't see it because the scaffolding is sitting in front of it. But this is how it will look when it's finished. So this is the inside of the portal number 3. As I said, the Constantine arch from Rome. And this is the modern facade in concrete, which has almost the same coloring, which is already executed, which is already finished. So here's the huge entrance. We expect at least 40,000 visitors per day. So it will be a real big hotspot of Berlin. And as I say, also a meeting place for the new G8 or G7 summit. This is the other one. This is the Schlüterhof. As I said, very nice part, a combination between sculpture and architecture. Andreas Schlüter, he personally designed 4 of these 6 sculptures in a new perspective, how it will look. And this is how it looked last week. It's a concrete construction, a heavy concrete construction. And here are really the massive limestone bases of the columns. It looks like in old Greece. So how is it built? This is the last part of my lecture. How these facades, how these wonderful sculptured facades are built. As I say, the first stage is that we have someone, Mr. Studemer, he for 10 years with his team was searching how the Schloss really looked. So you know about Baroque architecture, there's never an angle of 90 degrees, it's always wrong. This makes it nice. And this is the plan which shows the grid system and which shows the wrongness of the grid system. And all that was taken by us, like the axis, the different axes between the windows. Yeah. The next is that we have these special areas like this portal number 4, that this is the stage we build today, and this is how it can be built later, that we have resembling to that. The problem is, or the chance, let's put it that way, in America, the German public, the German government cannot pay a reconstruction. They can only pay a museum. So all the reconstruction parts have to be paid by the organization of Wilhelm von Bodin. They have to collect these 125 millions, which they will succeed. So this is what will be built now, and this is the later edition in the next years. This is a detailed photo of the facade. You see how explicit every window was done with this classical architecture. Every floor had a different window, and very, very detailed. And the next stage is that we made these very precise drawings of the facade. And before we started the whole thing, we made a full-size model in brick of one element. This alone costed a few million euros. And the construction is that we have a concrete building behind, and then we have 70 centimeters of massive brick. So the brick is moving itself. It has no joints in the facade. This is a very important thing. So that we can have the old technique, brick and plaster, and in between altogether 17,000 parts of limestone, which is produced just in time for every part of the wall. These are the few spolies, the few fountain things which then are integrated in the facade, but it's only less than a 0.25%. And this is a very nice way, a very nice thing that I really know why I studied architecture. In the old times, when they did, for example, this Eckkartusche, this corner cartouche, they made a bozzetto, a model the size 110 in the beginning. So Andreas Schlüter, we know, made a model scale 110. So this is a model scale 110 for the corner. This is one of the sculptures, and this is the director of the sculpture museum who is judging well how we should do it. And after we have approved the 110 model, we do the next model in the size 13. So we enlarge it and change it then a little bit. You see here, this is all done in clad, and here's a photo of the old Eckkartusche. And after that, we built a model in the size 11. This is the model one full-size model. And in this model, we also take the division into stones. You know, the firm has to know which stones to produce. And after this is done in clay, in clay 1. After in clay, you know, clay is moving, clay is shrinking. You make a model, you make a negative and then again a positive. So this is the positive of the 1-1. There was before a 1-1 in clay, and you see it, it's very costly. It's very costly. And after you have that, you give this model to the firm, and they produce then every single stone. And this is produced in Bamberg, where there's a very firm company, and then it gets transported back and built up, and it works. This is one sculptor who's doing a model, also again in clay, for one capital, and you see here he has the photo of the thing he has to copy, how serious and how precise this is done. This is one of the huge reliefs, which is 150 square meters. This is the clay, the positive of the 1-1s. You see how huge it is. They started with these figures. They have another coloring because they were safe, so they could make it in another technique. And well, you see how complicated it is. I don't have to explain that. This is how it then finally is done. The raw work of for the sculpturing is done by the robot, but the last inch is done per hand, so that when you have four capitals, everyone looks different. You know, it is not a mass production. And you see, it's real handwork, and this is why we believe this building will be loved so much, because it's very much handcraft. You know, our problem in our time is that every one of us has such a mobile thing. It's perfect in every sense. It contains the whole knowledge, and every kid knows I can never make it in that way. It's so precise. Whereas this technology is 5,000 years old. You know, Abu Simbel, the old temple in the south of Egypt, they did it very, very similar. They didn't have steel meisel, but they had copper things. But you know, we are referring on the real heart thing of architecture, and this is what this project makes so fascinating. This is one of the 200 eagles. They are all differently molded when it was mounted. Weighs a lot. You can't fly. And this is a plan which shows this is in a different way how all these things are fabricated. For example, this is the full-size models, and these are copies. But the copies, as I said, the last inch is done by hand. So all the four capitals are different. And this is now on the side, on the construction side. This is a concrete construction. This is a steel construction which holds the outside window. The outside window is the historic window. It's a wood window. And the inside window is the technical window with insulation, with security and all that stuff. And outside we built this 70 centimeters brick wall, and they are put in these 17,000 limestone parts just in time. Very interesting work. It looks like you know, there are paintings of Carl Friedrich von Schinkel, how they built in the old Greece time. And when you are on the construction site, you feel like in these times. And actually, they have machines, they have cranes to lift the stuff, but the working itself is very much handicraft. This is in the Schlüterhof, where they have also a vaulted part, you know, which sits then on limestone. So very complicated constructions. We worked 8 years on the planning alone, and here are tubes for some electricity. I don't know what that is, but in the very end, this is how it looks, and it will stay for 2 years before it gets plaster on. This is very, when you see it, then finally after so much work, you feel really relaxation. Yeah. This is inside of portal number 2. A few days we had no scaffolding. Now again there's a scaffolding and to construct the rest of the building. Yeah. What is inside? We spoke about the facades. Inside are huge collections. The collection which Alexander von Humboldt brought to Berlin, and it is a very intelligent solution that it was said the final content will be decided in the year 2016. So we started the project in 2008. It took us 8 years till we come to here. The opening will be in 3 years, 2019. And as museums, especially anthropological museums, change their way of exhibiting things, it was said the final design for the interior has to be very much fitting to what other museums showed, so that next week we get a final presentation of the new directors, which will show us what inside will be shown. We have gained Neil McGregor from London, who was for 15 years director of the British Museum, who's now working for us, and a guy from Holland, from Amsterdam, so that we have really an international team for museums, because, as I say, this is the new middle of the center of Berlin. This is the new middle of Berlin. It is kind of the new middle and the identification point for Germany. We really have to have a high level of what is inside. These are some pre-plannings. These are boats which are come from the Pacific. These are parts of the museum which will be integrated there. And these, as you see, this is an original part, and this is a kind of a copy. And nowadays, kids are allowed to climb on the copy. So, but you also see that the inner part of the museum has nothing to do with the outer part. The inner part is just plain empty space, what museum people like. This is another part, one of the first ideas, but the final ideas will be, which we will get in the next week. Well, I finish with two photos of historical rooms. You know, as I say, the Schloss, the rebuilding of the Schloss, the new function of the Schloss is not a singular thing. The first Schloss which had to be given a new content was the Louvre. As you know, Louis XVI was guillotinized, and Napoleon made Dinan an erector, and is now a museum. And it is changed every 20 years. If Louvre we have the imagination that it looked like it looked today. That's not true. The same happened to the Hofburg in Wien, to the Winterpalast Hermitage in Lenin, in Petersburg, and also in Vienna. And the Hofburg in Vienna, it also houses International Convention Center, parts of the Iran deal, the atomic deal were dead in the Wiener Hofburg, like referring to the Vienna Congress 1814 and 15. And what is intended for the next 40, 50 years, that with such a photo where we have this chair and where we have this sculpture and we have maybe 2 plates of the floor, we can reconstruct such a room full size, because you might not know what is the most visited room in Austria. Austria has a lot of castles. The most visited room in Austria is the private spa of Queen Sissi, who was a very sportive, extravagant woman. And this room is still existing. So we might do similar things. The museum people don't like the idea, because you will then come here and see, let's see, models of boats from the Pacific, and then you suddenly come into the working space of Frederick the Great, which is a mixture, but the Schloss is a mixture. This is the last photo. This room was the old staircase, which will be built in that way that you have only 4 columns in a square concrete form. And in former times, this was this wonderful staircase. But it was not only a staircase, it was more, you know. The kings did not have a real profession, so they were riding carriages. And here on the left, you can see, on the left side, you can climb up, it's a normal staircase. But on this side, you can go up with a small carriage with 2 horses. That was their hobby. You know, the husband of Queen Elizabeth is doing the same thing with 8 horses. But I think you can, I'm not familiar with it, I think you can only do it with 2 horses. But this staircase will be redone or built in the next years. It will cost about 12 million euro, and we already found someone who will subsidize this and bring that also to a finish. Thank you very much. Are there any questions, or please?
Yes. First, my name is Joseph, member of the faculty here, and I think it's an amazing thing, because up to now we have seen the history of architecture, which has been dismantling architecture and giving us just the raw bits. Yeah. Now it's amazing, because you're doing history of architecture, because you're starting with the raw bits and you're giving back architecture. My question at this point is, how many jobs you're creating? This is absolutely an amazing project for an estate to take along, because you are probably giving a lot of work for the economy and creating a lot of jobs.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good aspect. I think that the going on of the project always packed two other projects. Like I showed you the new Palazzo Barberini in Potsdam. This idea of reconstructing a palazzo in a not so important city like Berlin was evocated by the idea of reconstructing the Schloss. And this will not be the last project which is coming out of this thinking. That we are also doing the Garnisonkirche in Potsdam, which is 90 meter high. It's a €100 million project, a huge thing. I think that people will shift their vision of architecture, their relation to architecture, their relation to precious urban space in the middle of a city. And I think a lot of places in Germany, but also outside, will think about, is there any historic building which we can redo when we have enough information by photos or something like that? Because let's start another book. In the mid-60s, the city was a model of living which was given up. Like New York, mid-60s, people were only, who was living in the city? Policemen and priests. And the city was empty. And then came the book by Aldo Rossi, L'architettura della città. He said, we must have, the cities are the most precious thing we have. Let's live there again. And then come the environmental ideas. We have the catalytic converter. We have public transport. The city has cleaner air than ever before. And the other idea was people have to live in the city. So in Potsdam, that's 20% is housing. We have now cities which are better and more vivid than ever. So the city is the new quality, and the city needs detailed architecture, as it had before. This aspect was not necessary when only policemen and priests were living there. I'm exaggerating a little. So this is the kind of the finalization of a long process, which was started in the 60s by different approaches like environmental, social, economic, aesthetic, architectural, and this is a kind of a culmination point we have now. So we are eating now the cherry on top of the cake, but the cake was done by millions of other people. Please.
Yeah, the Franco Stella original competition entry, how closely did the final project follow his winning entry? I mean, did he propose doing the original reconstruction with that modern east facade? Is that his original idea, or did that evolve in some way?
No, I could. It is very close to it. It is very close. There was one step between which I did not show. He was even reconstructing the inner part of the so-called Eosander courtyard and put two cubes inside. So you had only 3 meters between the inner facade and the cube, like the Tempietro of Palladio. This was changed, but in the whole thing, and it was a competition in the scale 1/200, and it was, I would say, 90% of Franco's idea are now let through, which is a high degree for such a complex project. And there was a high unity. I mean, he got all the votes. There were 9 judges, and he got all the votes to be the first prize. There was no second prize. It was a clear devotion for his project. And because Franco is an astonishing figure. He was teaching architecture in, I think, in Genoa. So he's very much in historic architecture. He's a very fine man. You can only talk to him about literature, architecture, and philosophy. You know, I mentioned one story that, you know, who's Franco Stella. We visited a few other museums. We did a tour the 10 guys of the architecture. And we visited a new museum of David Chipperfield, which Franco didn't like. And he went to the library and bought a few books. And then we went on by train, and I said, Franco, show me what you have bought in the bookstore. And he said, no, this is a private thing. I said, Franco, we are reading a castle together. You have to show me what you were buying. You know? And he showed a book of Gadamer, German philosopher, a book of Kant, and one of Hobbes or something. So he's a real man of, he's living his ideas. And I think when you have such a figure as a lead figure, all the political faculties who give the money, they were convinced that he's serious in it. And so it came together, and we could produce 90% of this competition. Please.
In Germany, post-war Germany, classicism was always or often associated with fascism and repression. That also wanted to end to imperial or monarchic domination, and that's also the reason why a lot of it has been demolished by the Eastern.
Exactly.
And now there is a general shift in appreciation of classical or traditional. Or is it only in reconstructing these national monuments? When, for example, when people propose, and I know that now even Kohlhoff proposes Schinkel-like new buildings, is there a more receptive climate for classical architecture in Germany?
Absolutely, it is. But what the first part, what you said, is also very right, that classicism has different as I say, later forms. Albert Speer also produced a kind of a late classicism, but this is a phenomenon which we have also in France. Trocadero is also a kind of a French late classicism. But you're very right. The Baroque architecture here has nothing to do with German imperialism. You know, the phase of the German expanding is starting with Bismarck, 1866, the war to Austria and France, 1870-71. So at that time, the Schloss was finished. The last part of the Schloss which was done was the cupola, which was added in 1840 by Eosander von Goethe, who was an architect. So that helped the Schloss very much, that it was that it was not playing a role in the negative part of the German history. Hitler was never in the Schloss. There are no Partei things with the Schloss. That would have been very difficult, because the German society is very sensitive with that. And the second part of the question is very right, that we have a long process in the so-called critical reconstruction, which was started in the mid-80s in Berlin with also in other cities, International Bauausstellung, International Building Exhibition, that you say the new buildings have to take up very much the scale, the functions of the former buildings, the heights, the shapes of the sites. For example, as I showed you, that the new Schloss follows exactly the irregular angles, and altogether we have a kind of a new historic movement in architecture. Absolutely, absolutely.
But the church in Potsdam is where Hitler has been consecrated, and you still rebuild it. This building, this Garnisonkirche, is also a very interesting project. It's a completely different thing. We are doing it without Franco. We suggested full-size brick walls. So we have 3-meter brick walls, which are 66 meters high. The biggest brick construction in Germany since 200 years. And yes, it is politically complicated, because there was a so-called day in Potsdam where Hitler greeted Hindenburg, and Hindenburg was the symbol for the Kaiserreich. You know, Hindenburg was the old marshal who was leading Germany politically in the First World War, and was a terrible figure in the Weimar Republic. But the persons behind the construction of Garnisonkirche is a very prominent Protestant bishop, Wolfgang Huber, and he says
this building is so complex in German history. We have Bach, we have Frederick the Great, we have Friedrich Wilhelm the First, the Soldatenkönig, the soldiers king, who never did a war, who just collected big guys for his guard. We have, history is a thing which is complex, and you cannot pick the positive things out, like when you go to restaurants, Italian cappuccino and French wine. History is history. And as in Potsdam, the Schloss was reconstructed, and the Garnisonkirche was a kind of an antipode. There was a space in between where the parades was done. This project will hopefully succeed. We are the last centimeters. But 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible. That's really right. Please.
Thomas, I want to ask a more general question, since I myself, of course, I'm not an architect, but a philosopher. We had a very interesting conversation a few months ago in which you said that one of the peculiarities of architecture is that architecture, unlike, for example, physics or chemistry, hasn't done such great changes in the course of the last 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And that is something which architecture is connected, by which architecture is connected to philosophy. In philosophy, the basic arguments have been around for 2,500 years. And in architecture, the basic forms of building have been around for a long time. And in many aspects, it always seemed to me that the great conflict of architecture in the 20th century between modernist and historicist architecture is very similar to the main conflict in 20th century philosophy between more continental and more analytical philosophy. And what I found always astonishing about your work, Thomas, is you always try to combine the two. Already as a young man, you were traveling all over Europe, painting the great buildings, remodeling them, but you were an absolute modernist. And when you were studying here at the IIT, Mies van der Rohe was your god, and you were absolutely enthusiastic of modernist architecture. It seems to me that in the course of the last 10 to 20 years, you have become more appreciative of the pre-modern tradition. You see certain dangers in modern architecture, and that the reason why this great project of the castle fascinated you was that you recognized, and I want to say that this is one of the reasons why I admire Thomas, that often great intellectual and artistic feats must be accompanied by virtues. And Thomas' virtue was when his office also competed for the Schloss. And when he saw the Stella project, he said, Stella is much better than we are. We have to work together with him. And I was very impressed how he immediately recognized the superiority of Stella. He said, what I like so much is that Stella has found the exact balance between near historical reconstruction and making the living part of Berlin as it has developed in the last decades. This balance between respect for the past and recognition of the necessity of being part of a living modern city. And I think it would be interesting, since the Notre Dame School of Architecture is in the United States famous for this very strong historical awareness. You have already seen it by walking through the building. They don't want to build more skyscrapers, but they want to be inspired by the classical Palladian tradition that we have in Jefferson. How do you see the balance between being inspired by the great past of a discipline that has already produced some of its greatest works millennia ago, and the necessity of living in a modern society? If you could a little bit elaborate on that.
That's a very complicated question.
I feel the name to answer.
Well, let's put it that way. We are here on a place on the campus, this wonderful campus, which never the question arose is what is better, traditional or modern architecture, because this is such a perfect combination of both, but it's more linked to the conservative. I have to say a bigger approach. The problem for architecture is that all the other disciplines like medicine, combination, traffic have done incredible advances in the last 100 years. You know, traveling 100 years ago, telephoning, no way. So one of the very few things which is stable is how you clothe yourself and how you house. For us, the ideal city is although I studied in IIT, is Paris. You know, the Paris of the 19th century, And because it has the balance between public space, between private space, the attractivity of the city which is working without a car. You know, Paris was defined before the invention of the car. It was even defined before the invention of the tube, of the underground U-Bahn. So this model of Paris works. It was invented before the internet and the handy, that all works. So this system of the city of Paris 19th century is able to integrate all the new things. It was invented before the invention of the elevator, which helped it, and it was invented when there was the, how we say it, Geruchsverschluss, that you can close the toilet with water from stinking. This is a very important thing. Without this invention, a big city would not work. So, you know, when the water goes, so the thing is, or furniture, the greatest furniture was invented by the Egyptians, 4,000 years. They have stools, they have tables, incredible, yeah. The same with dressing, you know, what the shirts we have, they are all 19th century, from the idea of your vest and on that. This is, so architecture is much more related to history, to tradition than the other disciplines. Like flying has no tradition. It was first played in 1903 or something. And on the other hand, mankind has a strong fascination for the new one. You, when you are young, you want to explore the world, and it is very understandable that people like Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, and Frank Lloyd Wright did what they did. But the problem is that you must be a genius to copy a Mies. Mies's architecture is only able for genius, and you have to have clients who pay the cleaning. We built this Miesian pavilion in the middle of Berlin, the train station in Potsdamer Platz, and you know what problem is? The cleaning costs for the glass walls, which are freestanding in the traffic, is a few €100,000 per year. So architecture has also very much to do how it really works in the washing, on the washing table. What are the costs? And then you have two kinds of architecture. You have the architecture which has to be modern, like the airport, like the train station, like the power station, like the tube, things like that. And you have the spaces which are much more for the relaxation or for the constant use, like the inner part of Berlin or a university campus like here. And I would say this doesn't make sense for the first view, but I think you have to distinguish between where you can use a more conservative system, and on the other hand, where you have to use a modern system. And we are building both systems. I mean, our office has 50 jobs right now, and 3 of them are historic buildings, Garnisonskirche, Barberinen, and Schloss, and the other are modern. We have both. But I think that the ideas, there's a big tragedy about the Bauhaus, which I really admire, that the multiplication of the Bauhaus ideas, they really did not work in the long run. That's a thing you must see. Speaking as an educated man or the educated society must confess this and this did not work. We have to abolish it again, like DDT, you know, this poison which was used in the 50s for getting flies, and now it's forbidden. You are punished when you own it. And this is similar in architecture. I think in downtown New York, it's absolutely clear that you use this Mies technique, yeah? But you can't use it in a city like here. It wouldn't make sense to build a high-rise here. And it has become more difficult. I mean, when you see how architects like Schinkel went to their work, they had very few choices. I mean, they were geniuses, no question about that. But their decisions were easier. And like in modern other questions, as we have so many possibilities, the question of how you decide is really, really more and more complicated than in former times, you know. And but on the other hand, our societies have learned and have improved, and it took 50 years of learning. I mean, example which happened 100 times in Boston, wonderful seaside, a wonderful link between city and harbor and lake, and there was a highway built. And it took a long time, and then there was a roof over the highway, and the city is linked back to the roof, to where the Boston Tea Party happened. You have again this wonderful situation, city at the water. But it took a thinking process for the whole society. It is not only the fault of one or two people, it's a whole society. We have the same in Düsseldorf, where we built a high-rise between river, Rhine, and city. And I think, like in other things, our societies are able to learn, and we are learning. Learning takes time. Learning costs money because of wrong building. To demolish a million is nothing. You're talking about billions. But as catalytic converter was also a thing, although cars are changed every 8 years. You throw it away. As I believe, as our society is learning, and this is also a learning process, we are on a good way. Please.
I think the point you were referring is, I appreciate you raising the point, because I think we're all modernists in the sense that we're living in this
Absolutely.
today, we're alive, so we are contemporary, that's one point. And if we're looking for a dentist, we're all modernists. But if we're looking for a port wine or cheese, I think we're all traditional.
Absolutely.
And this takes us to the point of appropriateness. What is appropriate to address? If we are with friends on a football game, probably we indulge ourselves with the appropriate of that. If we're going to a dress party or a funeral, we will be accordingly. And this is one of the issues that I think is fundamental. And because there's a learning curve in freedom, there's also a learning curve in revolution. You want to, in the first place, just to get everything out of the way, but then you start to be, well, probably this should, we should have a second thought on this and that. And I think there's a process of going to the sustainability. I think there was this issue in the 70s and the 80s, particularly in the 80s, particularly when you have the Venice Biennale. I think that was a very important.
La presenza del passato.
Oh yes, organized by Portuguese. I think that was a shifting point.
Exactly.
With all these groups that you mentioned, Aldo Rossi, about the other, and also Michael Graves and the Quilmentary and Leon Clear, and I think at that moment all this attention was called in, but now we start to realize that it's not only bringing people to downtown, it's also creating jobs. And the issue of the economical realm is the issue that hasn't been figured out. And what we are realizing now, and this is a tendency that now the European Union is really now thinking about, is they've started to understand that because as cities have the color of the local materials, they realize that now by going back to the reconstruction of the centers, they will reinvent the economical fabric that has been destroyed with the industrial crafts of the steel, the concrete, and the glass, which actually brought us to the point where you're saying that having all these cities in glass had a tremendous expenditure and a tremendous loss of money. Probably if we use that money for producing this kind of spaces, as we realize they have lower maintenance than
There is, when I can add to that point, there's a poem of Andy Warhol, He says, the best thing about New York is Coca-Cola. The best thing about Rome is Coca-Cola. The best thing about Paris is Coca-Cola. There is no good thing in Tokyo, it has no Coca-Cola. Speaking of local color, a friend of mine who's in the Vogue fashion business, he said by the internet is changing the optical vision of our cities, because what we had in the last years, the same shop, exact same shop in every place, this is abandoned because the shopping shifts into the internet. We had the same with banks. In earlier times, all the important places in the city, public places in the city, were given to banks. Now the banks in Germany sit in the second floor. Banking is in the internet and in the money machine. So we have the chance by these changes that the cities go more to, as you said, every city has their own color of their material. Yeah? Paris is Mangador. Here in Indiana, this limestone you have. These are improvements which are coming, and it's great that they're coming.
And not everyone knows. Not everyone knows that
Yeah.
in the world, have these houses all decorated in neoclassical style.
Yes, I know. Yeah, absolutely. There's another question.
Yeah. But it really is intriguing the way in which you integrated these technological processes, and the use of photography is a vital part of the design process. Just almost unbelievable.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? Or this is a good final sentence. So thank you. And I hope